I'm Tony Kent, and this is another episode of Tony Kent Writes and Cross-Examines. Although I am now conscious that's probably the wrong thing to call this, because today's guest has seen some real cross-examinations in her previous day job when she was a reporter and stationed at the Old Bailey and places like that. So I'll probably call this Tony Kent Writes and Gently Probes, because otherwise I'll be rather embarrassed. So today's guest is COLETTE McBETH. COLETTE is the author of Precious Things, The Life I Left Behind, An Act of Silence, and most recently, Call Me a Liar. Hi, COLETTE.
Hello, how are you doing?
Very well. Can you hear us okay?
Absolutely fine.
Wonderful. So, COLETTE, I was just saying, your previous job before you decided to go full-time headlong into the writing world was you were a reporter.
I was a television correspondent for the BBC. And I did that for about 10 years, actually. And it was great. And you probably know this, Tony, but it was just such great material to feed into crime novels. Because actually, for me, one of the things that always frustrated me as a reporter was you kind of get the headline story, but there's so many different stories beneath that and behind that about, you know, why do people commit crimes? What drives them to it? So I think that was what fascinated me.
So what fascinates you, sort of the next step in the depth of the story?
Yeah, because I think I realized at a very early age that actually the story that, you know, you present in, like in television, you might have 1 minute 45, or if it's the top story, you might be given like 2.5 minutes to tell this story. And actually you can't tell any story, you know, so you have to kind of pick one line and follow it through. But there was always so much more. I mean, one of the big stories that I did was the Steve Wright, who murdered 5 women in Ipswich. Yes. And so I did that from beginning to end. And I was just fascinated by many things in that case. But one was, you know, his girlfriend at the time who lived with them. Did she notice? And like, you know, if you live with and again, I'm sure these things maybe go through your mind, but if you live with a serial killer, what clues do they give away? Is it just something that kind of breaks in them one day? Because as far as we know, he hadn't done anything like that before. So what drove him to that? What clues did he give away? At what point did she realize he was lying? And there's a really nice story behind that, actually, or an interesting story, in so much as she thought he was telling the truth until the day that she was watching the news and learned that in court, Steve Wright had said that he was driving during the night because it was something he always did, because he couldn't sleep. And she said that was the moment that she realized he was lying about everything. She said because he was one of those blokes who, as soon as his head hit the pillow, he fell asleep. And so it's just those tiny little things that give people away. And again, that really fascinates me.
Well, it's an interesting transition, isn't it, to go from being able to tell the excerpts effectively, or the right word is the headlines, I guess, to be able to tell the story. Because I guess the story that's being told in the newspapers and which is obviously a different medium to you, and a very different medium, but on the newspapers or on TV, it is effectively, even though you get a headline, then you get some talk or some writing afterwards, as you say, it's still really the headline. You can't get the detail.
Yeah, well, it was really funny. I did the Faber writing course like back in the Jurassic Age in like 2011. I think I was one of the first people to do that course. And one of the things that I found when I was writing was I wrote really sparsely, because of course, if you've got, you know, 1 minute 45 to write, you leave everything out. And everyone else was kind of chucking everything into their first drafts, and they were these really weighty, you know, tomes. And I was just kind of wondering, how on earth am I ever going to make it to 90,000 words? What do I have to add to this story? So that was a real challenge for me.
Well, you must be the opposite to me, because from a legal point of view, it's all about making sure every single angle is covered. And so when I wrote my first draft of my first book, I gave that to just a friend in the industry who read it and said, he said, I guarantee you could lose every 6th and 7th word and it would make no difference.
And that's quite soul destroying, isn't it? So like, okay. I mean, what I do, my process now is that I probably write my first drafts, again, are really, you know, slim. So they tend to be about 60,000 words, maybe less. I mean, I've written first drafts in about 45,000 words, mainly because I can't be bothered as well. I hate first drafts. And then, you know, now because I'm on to my 6th book, I know that that's fine, and that what's going to happen when I go back is that I'll kind of add to the characterization, and, you know, the subplots come out. But the first draft, yeah, really, really thin.
Yeah. So the first draft, you're almost going in as your headlines. You're almost going in as your as your classic previous job, and then you're filling in the gaps, filling in the details.
Yeah, I kind of think of it as the bones of something. You know, you just kind of, and I don't like, you know, I mean, I know a lot of writers are different. Some people love the blank page and, you know, that kind of creating something new, whereas I really like having something and making it better. So for me, the first draft is like having my teeth extracted. So, which is why I want to get through it as quickly as possible.
That's interesting. I think that's almost the polar opposite to myself. So it's interesting to hear that. Did you, on an aside, just because it's occurred to me now, the Steve Wright case, the young prosecution barrister is now an author. I don't know if you came across him, Jamie Sawyer, who was the young barrister prosecuting the case. I think he was being, I can't quite remember who was leading it now, but he is now an author of sort of high concept sci-fi opera.
Wow, that's the kind of
the Lazarus Wars and the Infinity Wars. It's very, very interesting. And I think for him, that's probably a release from that kind of horrible darkness that he has to see there.
Yeah. Do you find that you kind of find the books are a release?
Enormously, yes. I mean, people think I write legal thrillers because I have a barrister character, but I don't. He just happens to be one. I couldn't handle writing legal thrillers day in, day out. That would drive me mad. But going back to your books, I mean, how would you describe your part of the genre? Because obviously, I say quite a lot that the whole idea of crime writing is such a wide genre that it actually encompasses about 10 genres. Where would your books fall?
I think there has been a kind of progression. I think that maybe for branding, it's not ideal because, you know, I suppose publishers want something that's kind of the same, but a little bit different every time. And I don't think I've produced that. So Precious Thing was a psychological thriller, you know, about two school friends, two female friends who kind of set out to destroy each other because of something that had happened in their past. And The Life I Left Behind, actually, again, that really drew on my experience as a reporter. And there was one case in particular whereby a woman had been murdered, and the murderer had taken the police to the site where he had buried another body. And I mean, it seemed like a couple of weeks, I might be wrong, but nobody knew who this second body was. And that really got me thinking that, you know, in the news and actually in you know, criminal reporting, we tend to focus a lot on the defendants and the guilty parties rather than the victims.
Yes.
So that was written very much from the point of the victim. And actually the woman who, one of the main characters, she was already dead. So it was kind of like her trying to solve her own murder.
I now really want to read that. I've not read that. I want to. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, do you know what? Out of all my books, I think that's the one that people kind of go back to and say, "Oh my goodness, I love that book."
It's very original, wasn't it? It's a different way of approaching things.
So yeah, there's two women, one dead and one alive, and the dead woman helps the woman who's alive kind of prevent her murder and help her solve what has been a miscarriage of justice. I haven't explained that very well. That sounds very confusing.
Honestly, whether you've explained it well or not, you've sold it. I'm ordering that on Amazon as soon as you're off here. So that sounds absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. An Act of Silence is way more a political thriller. So that's what I mean by moving.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to ask that, because that was nominated for the Ian Fleming Steel Dagger, wasn't it? Which is for espionage, really. Yeah. So that's a big jump from your first book with the two girls destroying each other's lives to then to be in the world of espionage.
When I say a political thriller, I mean, it still has, you know, it's about a mother who would do anything to protect her son, but it just so happens that the mother was at one point in her career the Home Secretary, and she was responsible for a big cover-up in order to save her son.
You were a political correspondent, weren't you?
I
With
was,
Sky.
yeah.
Yeah. Did that come into play?
The BBC, yeah, the BBC.
Oh, right, okay. Oh, yes, you were deputy editor at Sky. I remember that.
Yeah.
But you were a political correspondent with the BBC. Did that come into play when you were writing the third book?
Yeah, I think because what you notice, which is pretty obvious actually, because we probably all notice it when we're watching politicians interviewed on television, is that, you can ask them the same question over and over again, and they will just continue to say what they want to say.
Yeah.
And so there's this like massive gap, like a gulf between the truth and what they want to portray. And it always used to bug me, I genuinely believe that most politicians go into public life because they want to help. But at what point does that kind of become twisted, and you are prepared to do things that perhaps don't really sit well with your personality in order to further your goals, or The
question: what are you told? What new information are you given that make you realise that you might have been a bit vanilla at first, or a little bit naive?
What, me personally?
No, so in terms of if you go into politics, is it possible that you don't discover the world is not as you see it?
I think what you discover is that there's always a compromise. That no matter how kind of crystal clear your beliefs are, they tend to be in black and white, don't they? But then you go in and you realize, okay, well, we want to help all these people, but there's no money, or so it is that eternal compromise that you will try to do good within the parameters of what's possible. But of course, that message, that honesty, doesn't really sell. It's a hard sell to the public. So you try and couch it in, So
it's an interesting world, politics. How long were you there for?
Probably about 2 years.
Were you happy to get out?
Well, I had the option of staying on longer. They wanted me to stay at Westminster, but by this time I'd started the Faber course, and I kind of knew that I was going to leave the BBC. And it was quite hard work. The shifts were really hard. Some days you'd be on breakfast news at sort of 6 a.m, but that meant getting up at 4 and actually being on the phone at midnight, because you're ringing people who've been in the papers. I just could never work out when you were supposed to sleep. And also I had 2 young kids with another one on the way. So my son's just putting his thumbs up at me in the background.
He beat politics. No, it's a very, very advantageous life to have led there, isn't it? To be able to take the political side of things and the crime side from the Bailey and bring them all into your writing.
Yes, it's very rich, I think. And actually, if I'm brutally honest, I do miss it, because when I sold my first book, it was a really good deal, and it meant that I could write full time. And sometimes I wish that maybe that hadn't been the case. I'm not sure how I would have managed it. I mean, by that time I had 3 young kids, and I don't write particularly quickly, so I needed that time. But I do sometimes worry that sitting at home, kind of staring out the window, where are you getting the ideas from? Where is the connection to real life that really fires up your imagination?
I can see that. I mean, especially if it's one thing if you trade in kind of high concept, ridiculous adventure things, but if you're from the genres that you're writing in, from the areas of the genre you're writing in, you need some inspiration, don't you? You need real life is a help.
Yeah, and the funny thing with that is, is be careful what you wish for, because I always wanted to be a full-time writer, and actually I've found out that it doesn't suit me at all.
Oh, I did that last year. I took 3 months. I took 3 months off, thinking I'll take 3 months out of court and write a book, and I wrote 80 pages. And then I went back to work, and in 3 months, whilst doing trials and doing everything else, I wrote the next 500 pages. And it's weird. It's almost like you need the deadline. And I'm trying to keep these under 15 minutes to get us onto Instagram, Colette, and we're now at 14 minutes and 40 seconds. I told you they go so quickly, don't they? So quickly. So thank you very much for joining and for taking part. And, hopefully we'll talk again once there's a book coming out next year.
Definitely. And I need to get back to work so I can write 500 pages.
Thanks very much.